Looks like we have everybody connected. So welcome everybody. My name is Joanna Zimring-Town and I'm a coordinator for 3CSN. And I'm also a faculty counselor in the LA Community College District. And I'm actually just going to be your support person today. I'll be monitoring the chat and just helping out. We have a guest facilitator today, Mr. Eddie Chicharian, who unfortunately is not showing his video because he's having low bandwidth problems. So he's not going to be able to show his lovely face, but he will be sharing screen and he will be facilitating today's session. We do have you all on mute today, so if you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout today's session and letting Eddie know if we have any questions, but he has requested that we primarily hold the answering of questions till the end. So I'll be answering what I can in the chat and then holding the rest to the end. Otherwise, we thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Eddie.
Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate the intro. And thank you, everyone, for being here on Monday, August the 3rd. I'm sure as educators, we have a lot more fun things to be doing on August the 3rd, but you guys are here, and I appreciate that. I'm going to try and share screen. And as I do that, I'm just going to also note, because I see some math folks in the room, that this is certainly what you're seeing today is certainly a collaborative effort between several folks, including some people from the AMATIC, American Math Association of Tier Colleges. So I want to give them a shout out and say that their work is much appreciated here. And since I'm already 2 minutes into this, let's get right into it. Let's get this started. And let's see. We're going to start with an exercise. Super excited for this. So I'm going to put you into the shoes of the students today, since we're talking about assessment online for STEM. And I'm going to say, imagine that you're a STEM student. You're going to go back to those days when you were a STEM student yourself, and you just cheated on an online exam. And the question that we have is, why did you do it? Now, we're going to ask you to type your answer in the chat window, but do not submit it just yet. So one really cool thing that you could do with Zoom that I found throughout the last few months is there's this activity, the 3, 2, 1, go, many call it. Some say just wait and go. But basically, you type your response to a question like this, and then once the facilitator says go, that's when you submit your answer. So it's a great way to track which one of your students is awake. Are they really paying attention? Are they really going with the flow of the lesson? And it's a great way for you to collect feedback instantly. So why did you do it? You're a STEM student that just cheated on an online exam. It just happened. Why did you do it? What happened? So I'll give you a few seconds to write it in. And I see that some more folks have entered the room, so we're also giving them time to settle in as this is happening. But hold on to your answer. Don't submit it just yet. And when I say go, you'll hit enter. I'll give you a few seconds. So it seems like we've had enough time, since some of you are already submitting answers without having heard go. So with that in mind, let's hear from all of you. 3, 2, 1, and go. Let's see. Oh my goodness, look at these beautiful responses pouring in. So let's see, because I didn't study, because I wanted to get a good score, better score, save some time, less effort, was not confident, I thought I wouldn't get caught. I didn't know the answer and I can't afford a bad grade. And you guys could see all the other great responses. Get a higher GPA. I panicked, I didn't know how to study. I can get away with it. Professor will not know. Lack of confidence, and because I was able to do so. Boy, I really like that last response here. And I'm actually gonna say that's the most common response when we ask that question, is because I can. The reality of it is there are plenty of ways to cheat. There were plenty of ways to cheat in face-to-face classes, and there are plenty of ways to cheat in online classes. And whether you lock your student's browser, or you use Proctorio or similar video camera monitoring software, whether you install more cameras into your students' homes and you have a surveillance system going, well, no matter what you do, there's really, the reality is that there's going to be a way to cheat. I attended a math conference here, the local CMC Cube South, for those of you that are math, where there was a presentation on 3 ways to cheat Proctorio. And this was a couple of years ago, before the pandemic even started. So there's certainly ways to do it. If people want to cheat, they can. We know this as instructors. But the one thing we want to remember and focus on for today is the only thing that's stopping students from cheating on online assignments is their own moral code, right? It's their own ethics. And this is what we want to really play up to. And this is really what we want to discuss. So I'm going to start by giving you some tips for some online cheating, and then later on we'll delve into the bigger picture here a little more. But before we get to any of it, I think it's really important to first understand why students cheat. I think in order to understand better this whole cheating world, we need to really focus in on why students cheat. And this beautiful website that I'm gonna actually, let me see if I could copy and paste this into the chat right now so you guys could follow along. It's actually going to tell you all about the main reasons that students end up cheating on these exams. And it really has to deal with several factors, and the link should now be in the chat. So feel free to follow along on that webpage if you'd like, but it really has to do with these main parameters. So it's peer pressure, right? It's very easy to commit an act of academic dishonesty when you're being pressured to do so from your classmates. Performance anxiety, some of your responses feature that a lot. You know, you're very anxious about your academic performance, what grade you're gonna get, what's gonna happen to your GPA, et cetera, et cetera. What's your academic standing at the college or university you're in at the moment. There's a few more key factors here. Excuse making is one of them. It's just one test. It's just that one question. Come on, you know, it's only for this exam. Excuse making on exams is popular. There's the inability to manage the demands of student life. And gosh, how relevant is that for today's world in the current situation that we're in? It's probably one of the most common reasons for academic dishonesty is just students who cannot plan and manage their workload, and they end up in situations where the daily struggle to keep up with everything is really getting to them, and deadlines are being affected, and it ends up with you know, basically cheating because there's not enough time to prep for these exams when you have a job or two jobs, when you have a child to take care of, when you have a family to support, and you're going through a global pandemic, let's say, at the same time. So certainly a very serious reason for the moment. There's also situations that encourage academic dishonesty, right? So if you're looking on the webpage there, it specifies when course policies do not spell out clearly what students can and cannot do, or when the instructor is not careful in enforcing these academic integrity standards, some students may use the situation to commit acts of academic dishonesty, right? We see that happen a lot in math classes and certainly in STEM classes as well. So if the penalties are violating academic integrity standards, if those are minimal, some students will consider cheating to be worth the risk, right? There's very low risks of being caught, so why wouldn't I do it, or why wouldn't I go for it? There's a few more in there. You see self-justification habits. Again, this goes back, it's a little similar to the excuse making, right? Everyone is cheating in the class. I'm only doing it once. No one will get hurt by this. No one even has to know. I'm just trying to get through this class. You know, I really wasn't feeling well for the last couple of weeks. I just had no way to study, and you know, I need to get through this test. So these are some self-justification habits and examples of that. So unfamiliarity with what constitutes academic dishonesty and lack of understanding about consequences. I like to combine those two usually, and I think that it's often the case that students are not aware of the consequences when this happens, and also sometimes they're not even aware what constitutes academic dishonesty. A lot of us, especially in the STEM fields, like to assign labs and projects and all kinds of things, but maybe sometimes we're not as thorough in our directions or instructions to students, and we sort of rely on them to already have an independent knowledge of what constitutes academic dishonesty, and it seems that we're just maybe not necessarily on the same page sometimes. So it's always good to revisit that with your students and to sort of stress the importance of this topic with them. So very good page. I strongly recommend this. It's this website there that goes over a bunch of these. It's from Northern Illinois University. They have a whole academic integrity tutorial with some causes, consequences, and you know, their own take on it. So I recommend that link strongly to go over. Is a good resource. Okay, so as I mentioned, the goal for the day is to figure out some simple approaches and some practices to use in class that can impact and lower all these factors that you just saw in the previous slide. But really, again, we have to remember there's no way around it. All we can do is try to increase the moral standard and standing of our students that they have internally. And that's the only thing that you could do to prevent cheating factors to come into play. So I really like this image here. As you can see, there's a testing progress on the laptop that's on the table, probably through Proctorio or something. And the student's working hard, but she's also got her other second laptop that she's controlling under the table with her feet on a stool. The bird is giving her tips. There's notes all over the place. It's a do not disturb, keep out situation. So this isn't to say that's what all of our students are doing right now, but I'm sure a lot of you might be experiencing a rise in scores and averages from the spring semester and summer sessions. And I know that my colleagues in the math department at Pierce certainly were experiencing that. And a few of them were very convinced, you know, that some of these scores are not really representative of what our students were up to and what they were doing. So I'm sure a lot of you were in this situation, and that's okay. We have to work collectively to help our students out and to ultimately ensure that we're doing assessment right. So as I mentioned, I'll jump into it with a few simple approaches first to the more traditional assessment, to what we're all probably used to in a face-to-face environment. And then I want us to take a deeper dive here and to really start thinking about assessment as a whole and see how we could rethink assessment in this online realm. So a few tips first, like I mentioned, some simple approaches that are going to lower some of these factors for students to cheat. Some of these may seem obvious, but I think re-examining them closely might actually be very helpful. Tip number one, provide formula sheets. So as you could see, I teach math, so I have a math example here for this one, but providing a formula sheet is actually something that could really lower a lot of the cheating factors. Peer pressure, performance anxiety, excuse making, and self-justification habits is what we're targeting here. So it is very easy for a student on a test to get stuck because they can't remember a certain formula, or they're stuck on a step in a solution because they just cannot remember what the derivative or an integral of a math function is, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't we level the playing field here and provide the sheet of formulas needed for the exam to all students ahead of time. Okay, that way you know that there is not someone in your class that certainly, you know, has access to that formula in the, you know, cover of the book or something, or has printed it out and has it sitting in front of them like that student had on the floor, whereas others don't. So you're trying to be more equitable and you're leveling the field by giving every student the same set of formulas or the same access to the same information on the test. It also lowers the peer pressure, the performance anxiety, because now students know that all of them have access to the same set of information, and they could specifically not focus their attention on having to memorize a bunch of material versus knowing how to utilize it first. And we're always after creating independent learners, right? So provide the sheet before the exam or even at the beginning of the semester and be very clear with your class. Hey, this is what you're going to use on exam 1 or exam 2 or exam 3. Those of us that are going through remote teaching, which is pretty much most of us, I'm sure, in fall, one thing that I found out from a few colleagues that I thought was really cool, those of us that don't have access to printers, students don't have access to printers, you can mail this formula sheet to students. I didn't even think about that, but you could snail mail it to them and give them access to it before the semester even starts if you're in a situation like that. So, of course, you know, I teach math, and I see that there's a lot of math folks in the room as well, and maybe some other science folks feel this way as well, but you might be thinking, well, Eddie, you know, some of these formulas, you know, they're really important. The students must memorize them. What's going to happen if you just give them the formulas? I mean, that's a big move. And I do ask, you know, why? Does everybody know where this picture is from? Some of you might have seen this show, very popular TV show. It was on the air for a few years. It was called Lost. And it had to do with this gang of characters that you see here depicted that were stuck on an island. And it was all about survival, and there's all kinds of other details that obviously I'm not getting into. But this is called the deserted island effect. Many people refer to it this way. In other words, if you're deserted on an island and you need to know what the derivative of the sine function is, what are you going to do unless you memorized it? What are you going to do? There is no books. There is no internet. There is no formula sheets. There is no calculators. Well, while it will be helpful to know that, I think if you find yourself stuck on a deserted island, knowing the derivative of a sine function or any formula that you would put on a formula sheet is probably the last thing on your mind. So my answer to that response is, you must memorize the formulas. Is sure, there's some things that you definitely, as science instructors, feel are so important that your students must have access to them and must memorize them. But again, I always ask yourself when you're in a situation where you're trying to decide, why do they need to know this? Or will they have easy access to this once they're done with the class and once they're into the real world, trying to get a job, trying to work as a part of a team, and all that? Is there a reason for them to really memorize this without having to know better how to use it, right? That's probably what you're after, making sure that students know how to use information, not so much memorizing the information itself. Also knowing how to get to that piece of information. I go back to an example from geography. When I was learning geography, my instructor was using a lot of those old school maps, that were like projector screens, and you just roll down and you take a look. And even back then, with the technology available at the time, my instructor would say, I really don't know, I really don't care if you know what's the highest peak on all the continents, or what is the largest city in Europe, or what is the longest river in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need you to know everything that's on the map. What I need you to know is how to read the map so that you could access all the information on it. I need you to know what different colors on the map indicate as far as the key is concerned. I need you to understand what the different contour lines represent as far as elevation goes. And what does the size of the dot indicating the name of the city mean, right? So it's about knowing how to read the map, not about the information on the map. And that really stuck with me because that instructor was really ahead of the time, come to think of it. What that instructor is basically saying is, I need you to know how to get to information, not how to memorize the information. Knowing how to get a piece of information is a lot more powerful than knowing what the information is. And later on in this presentation, we'll talk about that again in the form of a little website called Google, and how does that have to do with our assessment. So remember that. Meanwhile, tip number 2, a handwritten academic dishonesty statement. I'm sure many of you already have that in your exams. Strongly encourage it if you don't. It's really powerful. It's amazing how powerful it is. It lowers the factors mentioned on the slide there, as you can see the bullet points. So some of the same ones we hit earlier with tip number 1, but now it also takes care of the unfamiliarity with what constitutes academic dishonesty, which is important. There are many examples available online. This one here is from my colleague at Ematic, and I think it's a great short, to the point statement. And take a look, it's inside the box on the slide. And notice what it says. It says, after you have completed the exam, please copy this statement on the bottom of the last page and sign and date it to attest that you abided by it. And it says, I did not receive help on this exam from anyone other than my instructor. I did not help any other student with this exam. Very short, to the point, very powerful, and it's after the student has completed the exam. Notice how important that is. A lot of us like to put that at the very beginning of the test, which is great, also a good thing to do, but having put it at the very end of the exam, it really mentally somehow seems to affect the student if anything funky had happened, and it creates a weird situation. If they were involved in some sort of a cheating act or academic dishonesty act, it really makes them even more uncomfortable to sign it and put that at the very end of the test. So the placing, for whatever reason, seems to really affect their psyche. And as I said, the only thing you could do is just play off of the moral stance of your students. So the placement there seems to be working. I just thought that was very interesting. But anyway, as I mentioned, many examples you could find online of academic dishonesty statements. And I like this one because it's very short and to the point. And also it focuses on the fact that not only did you not receive help on the exam from outside sources, you did not help anyone else with that. And that's a powerful statement, right? If you're involved into that type of situation, saying that you didn't help anyone else is probably just as powerful. Okay, with that in mind, we move to tip number 3. Use non-Googleable questions. There is that Googleable thing. And essay exams instead of multiple choice. We see that in math a lot. I'm sure in the sciences it's very similar as well, but it lowers the factors of performance anxiety, excuse making, and self-justification habits. And there's tons of websites, tons, that are able to now do a lot of these problems and show you the steps and show you the solutions, especially when it comes to procedural, computational based problems in math. And of course, those are found in physics, those are found in chemistry, such as balancing an equation. Obviously, any computation-based thing that you could think of or solve this equation type problem, you could actually pretty much at this point in time, Google and get solutions step by steps. One such website is Symbol Lab. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, in math especially. And there's many others, by the way. I'm only including, just naming one here, but it basically solves a quadratic equation like this one that it uses as an example, and it shows step-by-step solutions. So what you might want to do, instead of asking for multiple choice questions that would have only the answers available, is to actually ask students to show the work and try to make the equation not be the main problem, but make it a part of a problem, right? So if you're going to ask a more traditional problem like this, it's definitely good to see the work that the student does. This is where technology comes into play. You might want to ask the student to clearly show their work or their way of thinking by using a free scanning app like Cam Scanner. There's many that do what Cam Scanner does, but it essentially takes a picture of the student's notebook, their notes, and it turns it into a PDF file that looks like a photocopy, like a Xerox, right? So as you can see, this image here is taken from a student's work. X squared minus x minus 6 equals to 0, and the steps that follow in solving this equation. And then what you could do as an instructor is you could use any annotating program, such as Microsoft OneNote, or you could even use your Canvas accounts and annotate on there if you prefer. And you could insert that into a notebook and start annotating, as you can see in green and red there. You could make corrections and you could add on things to that student's work, giving them more direct feedback. Now, of course, there are certain situations you wouldn't want to ask a problem like this. Probably if you're doing math, it's a very low-hanging fruit and very not rewarding really to test what's going on. But while I take a sip of water, I do want to focus on this non-Googleable questions, and this is from math, but it does have some very, very interesting thoughts here. So I want you to take a look at this slide. Look at the questions in the first column and compare it to the second column. So I hope you see the pattern here. I could easily type these questions in the first column into Google or any search engine and probably get a response rather quickly, or find a website that will allow me to, input and do some further research and get the answer anyway. But if you look at the second column, this is the type of questions that we want to be after in math, and we really want to stimulate thinking. Again, we want to ask things that are not Googleable, things that students really have to have a conceptual understanding of in order to arrive at a solid answer. So I know that all of you are able to pretty much adapt this to whatever field you're teaching, or I'm hoping it will get you to sort of think about the type of questions you're asking in your field and what would be Googleable for that versus what would be not so Googleable for your own field. So I hope that this is a helpful source, but you could honestly, just by rewording questions and changing the perspective from which you ask, you could get to so much more information and you could get a lot more responses from your students that will allow you to assess better where they're at versus asking the Googleable questions you see in the first column. So, okay, so that's another tip. Moving forward here, tip number 4 is to give open notebook essay type exams. It lowers the factors listed there. And I know a lot of us already in the remote environment like to time lock our exams. We give the students some time limit for which they could work, and we say, hey, you have 60 minutes to do this exam. Log in and do it then. That's helpful. But I really know that there's a lot of folks hesitant to do an open notebook essay exam type question, and I think that it's important to revisit that because honestly, again, you're leveling the field. It's an equity issue. If you say everyone, you're allowed to use your notes, you now know that everyone is playing on the same level field because they're all using their notes. And also you're doing something else here. You're actually putting things back on the students. You're putting the responsibility of doing well back on the student, and it's allowing them to take the class a little more seriously without feeling the burden of pressure during exams, because they know right off the bat that they're allowed to use their notebook during the test. So if they put the right time and effort into the class, their notebooks and their notes are going to look amazing. Everyone's got their own way of taking good notes in STEM classes, but knowing that these notes are now important to your performance on the test significantly improves how you take these notes. And well, you could certainly focus even yourself as an instructor and maybe even have a direct conversation about some test taking and note taking strategies with your students, where you're helping them organize the information for the class better. So I really like this strategy for that reason. And I find that students who don't put the right time and effort into the class usually end up not having good notes and well-organized notebooks. So I don't feel bad for saying everyone is allowed to use their notes, because really it's sort of putting the responsibility on the student, yet you're removing a lot of pressure. You're removing the burden of pressure for exams by doing that. So strongly encourage that. I think I've only seen good results from the colleagues that have tried it so far. And, you know, again, it's a way to make things more equitable by leveling the field. So for remote teaching, make sure you don't use this technique with multiple choice exams, right? Again, multiple choice exams would be would be much easier if you had an open notebook type situation. But essay exams, on the other hand, make sure where students have to show their work and show their thinking in obtaining an answer. Do we use multiple exam versions? Try to vary the questions as much as possible with this technique. And you don't have to label the different versions. It's up to you, whatever works. But I do think that just giving folks a little more freedom there and variation also makes your job a little easier, because you could always say, well, you know, it's the same type of question, but hey, I varied it a little bit here to see how student performance did, and it's not trying to cheat anyone out of a grade. So anyway, so that was the fourth tip, and this was tip number 5 is next, and that's to schedule short oral exams. This is something that I know when I grew up in Eastern Europe and I had to go to elementary and middle school, this was the type of examinations I would often get. And it's not what I mean here when I say oral exams, because when I hear oral exam, again, based on my own personal history, I'm imagining myself in front of 25 or 30 other students having to stand up and having to respond to prompts on the spot. Boy, no pressure, right, whatsoever. And having to be prepared for the day with the curriculum that was taught in the previous week or two. That's not what we mean here. Instead, what we mean, just to clarify, is you could schedule some 15-minute sessions, and you decide maybe 20 minutes makes more sense for your field at the convenience of the student, and you could call it an oral exam or an oral interview or an oral assessment in the sense of an interview or whatever you want to call it, where it's a conversation. It's a relaxed session where it's you and the student one-on-one on Zoom. You have them put their camera on, and you basically give them the questions ahead of time. You give them a specific list of learning objectives that you'll be testing them on. You want to keep it concise. You don't want to put topics from the entire class on there. And then you say, hey, be prepared. I'm going to ask you a question relating to these topics, and I just want to have a conversation about it. You know, in a calculus course, I might say something like, hey, the derivative has many interpretations. For example, there's a geometric interpretation. It's the slope of the tangent line to a curve on representing a function. I might say the algebraic definition is that it's the limit of a difference quotient. I might say that a real world application is that it represents instantaneous velocity, which is more of a physics definition, right? And then I might say, talk about these different interpretations of the derivative and how they relate. So that's just me having a conversation about a math topic on the spot. I might ask them to do some computation and some working out of problems, right? That's where I use my technology, and I ask them to scan the solutions. But it's one-on-one, and it allows to really sort of ask a lot of questions and follow up directly on the spot. I use Calendly, which is something I recently actually discovered through my publisher's rep, because He uses it anyway. It's great. It's basically this website where you give your availability to students, and then you say, hey, the week 8 of the semester, I'm available at these 15-minute slots, or again, for you, it could be 20 or 10, depending on what is it that you want to test and how you want to go about it. And then you say, I'm going to take up one class time, or 1 day or 2 days of your actual scheduled class time, and make some of the appointments during that time. And then the rest of you, we would have to go during office hours or at another convenient time to you. Just go on Calendly and select the time that works for you, first come, first serve basis, and then we'll have our examination that way. You could use Doodle polls. You could use Zoom Scheduler, I believe, is a feature that I've heard others use, through where you're able to schedule your Zoom time with students as well into 15-minute increments. Whatever works. I like Calendly because it's free and very well organized, and it hooks up with my Outlook calendar and my Zoom. So when the student logs in and they select the 15-minute slot, it automatically, that slot becomes available in my calendar for others to see. And it sets an appointment to where the student gets an automatic email with a Zoom link for that time and day and that 15-minute slot. Very powerful to have these exams. You could require the ID, like I said, and you could definitely require the student to be on camera, since this is an exam type situation. So you could ask that they're on camera and they present a photo ID to you. But it's a way for them to attend from a safe place that has a solid internet connection, and they could pick a time that's convenient that they know will work out to where they're not busy with other real life things going on, whether it's childcare, whether it's working, whatever it is they have going on. You want to make sure that they have options so that they're doing this at a time that's convenient for them. Big fan of Calendly. Check it out. There's a free version that everyone could sign up for. You don't have to pay for any professional account or anything like that. The free version does what you need. And try out the oral exams. Try to think what that would look like. I had to really think about it for a math class, and I'm thinking of several. I'm teaching a Calc 1 class in the fall. I'm thinking of several ways I could do this. And I think waiting for some time to pass by, in the semester, I could probably pull off 1 or 2 oral exams to where one could be a little more computational and focused on some work that the student could do on paper and present to me, and the other one could be more conversational and more broad picture type thing, where I'm asking sort of more general questions that are conceptual, and I'm sort of working them out through a conversational piece. So it's a very, very interesting approach, and one I challenge you to think about and to really think about and implement in your classes. Okay, but really, why are we here, right? What did we say? We're gonna give you some tips. So you have some tips now for how to do the more traditional assessment, but really, again, we need to target the real issue here and why cheating occurs. We have to get past these exams and traditional assessments. We have to really think of a better way to target student knowledge and to sort of try something new, because maybe what we were doing traditionally as far as assessment goes wasn't working in the first place. And what factors do we control in assessment? To think about that, first we have to figure this out. What is it that we're in firm control of when it comes to assessment? Well, as the instructors that write the assessment, we want to focus on authenticity. We want to focus on alignment to our course objectives. At Pierce College, we call them CORs. Some of you might have another name for those at your institution. We want to focus on the variety of assessment. We want to do that in a way that allows for student creativity and agency, a very important piece. We want to focus on transparency in showing students what we will test them on and what we ask them to learn. That is so crucial. I think that there's a lot of room for growth in STEM when it comes to that. Increasing these factors ultimately is going to allow for more equity and diversity in STEM, and that's always a good thing. Going back to what I was saying just a few seconds ago, when we talk about authenticity, this is what a traditional STEM assessment looks like. Whether it's our class, and for some of you, that's not the case, great. You're already ahead of the curve. You're already a trendsetter here. But this is what a lot of students are used to. I'm thinking back to my educational journey, and I'm hoping you are thinking back to yours. How many times did you find yourself taking an exam in a large room similar to this one on a tiny desk, trying to get your Scantron and you work in, and trying to get through the assignments and you know, trying to finish up. And think back to even before your STEM assessment, whether it was the SAT or the ACT or the AP test that you were taking, or the high school exit exam that you had to go through, all those standardized testing you were put through in our education system kind of looks like this. And a lot of traditional STEM assessment looks like that still. Now, I want you to compare that to what actual STEM workplaces look like, which a lot of you are familiar with. And I'm sure you'll see every now and then the one person here that's working on the computer and trying something out. Maybe there's another one and a third one even. But usually what you see is a lot of collective work, working on computers here, but these people are talking to each other and they're really connecting to the network, and there's really work in labs, and there's work in the field that's always done in groups, right? That's the point we're trying to drive to here. So we have to think about that. When we're doing our own assessment, are we really representative of what our students are to expect once they enter the industry field, or once they enter research or future, you know, future graduate programs where there's a lot more collaboration, right? So we need to think about that piece. Are we fairly representing our fields and our students' future professions through our assessment? That's something to think about. Well, again, here's the question posed a little more formally. How close is the assessment to the work the student will perform in the real world? And I want everyone to challenge themselves by thinking, how can you design more authentic assessments? How is it that you get to that point? What is it that you could do in your assessment that's going to demonstrate better what students are to expect after graduation? So some of you might have, I'm going to move forward here. Some of you might be fans of Baskin-Robbins, not a commercial or anything like that, but just a very good tool to illustrate my point. And since it's August 3rd and it's 100 degrees outside, who doesn't like ice cream on a hot day, right? Baskin-Robbins is known for their 31 flavors, right? That occasionally rotate. But we wanna think a little more focused here. It's not like a Baskin-Robbins store where you walk in and you're just like, man, there's 31 flavors, I want to try them all. So curriculum overload is here to stay in STEM. Okay, there's no denying that. We're friends of the new, always were, always will be, and that's just the nature of the beast, right? I mean, there's so much research and so much publication going on in STEM. There's new discoveries to this day going on in the sciences. There's journal articles that are being written. There's new facts being found, and the fields are just very progressive. So obviously, there's going to be more and more curriculum that pops up. Now, mathematics, my field, it's a little different from the rest. Calculus hasn't changed in over 100 years, despite how many calculus new editions there are. We're still working with the same math, but every now and then there is very much a new discovery and a new theorem and a new result. So again, very progressive fields in STEM. So what you want to do when you think of your curriculum and when you really focus in on your classes, try your best and think, are the course objectives actually real and authentic? So is what we're teaching the real deal, and is it authentic in the sense of representative, right? Going back to those last two pictures, representative of what the students will see down the line. So try to settle on the 5 big topics or modules, again, whatever you're calling them in your college, and what you want the students to get out of the class. Then what you want to do is sit down with your colleagues and really decide, what are those 5 big ones? What are the 5 flavors in Baskin-Robbins that you're going to stick to this summer? And what is it that you want your students to get out of the class, so that as they look at the next course or more science courses, it's going to be authentic and representative of the real world. Then what you do is, with that list, you start looking at the CORs, right, the course objectives, and you try to say, okay, are those representative now of these 5 big goals? Now, this is for folks in Pierce Math that know the answer. For those of you that are not in Pierce Math, I'll tell you the answer. How many times has the COR for our intermediate algebra course changed at Pierce? How many flavors have we had of that? Oh gosh, tons. We started changing it's called Math 125, used to be at least. We started changing our Math 125 CORs years ago. We went through several iterations. Then we had a program called ASAP that combined elementary and intermediate algebra together. Recently, under AB 705, we got rid of the 125 course altogether and created a new intermediate algebra and beginning algebra 134 course. So we've had to go over this many, many times, and I'm glad we did, because as a department, we're really able to revisit the 5 big ideas every time we did this. So I wanted to give you another example. This is from a college algebra class from another college, another institution, not peers. And this is what they did. They sat down and take a look at this list. They revisited their main topics. Yes, they ended up with 7. That's why I told you 5, because if I tell you 5, you end up with 7 or 8. If I tell you 7, you end up with 10, right? So to make sure you end up with a reasonable number, we tell you 5, and then you build up to it. But take a look at each one. I mean, these are basic algebra topics. They're not very complex topics, but they certainly play a role within some real-world applications and the next courses the students will take. Take a look at each one of them very briefly here. Now, notice some of them might appear in another course. They might appear in the next course. Usually students after this course would take either a business calculus course, or they might actually take a pre-calculus course, depending on the school that they're in and the requirements. It might be that some of these topics appear again, but they now appear through a different lens. They now appear through a different perspective. It might be that this is an introductory level to some topics, and then later on, you delve into the bigger picture with some of them. So now that you've taken a look at that, let's talk about achieving alignment, right? There's this idea of different levels of knowledge. So you could examine each one of these learning objectives that you saw, for example, in this college algebra course. But what you could do that is, when you do that, rather, I should say, keep in mind the independent learner of 2020 that you're working with, right? And you want to look at these levels. This is my friend Maria Purser likes to use these 4 terms. Many others have done similar research work, and they use similar terms that you might have seen or ran across. I really like Maria's terms, so I'm using those. Existence, supported. So there's existence knowledge, there's supported knowledge, independent knowledge, and lifetime knowledge, right? And there's some basic questions about each here, but I want to expand on these. There's this really helpful chart. So take a look at that. I hope everyone can see the slide, and I'll see if I could share a document here in the chat that actually has this chart in a Word file. And you could open that and see it a little easier for your eyes on the screen in front of you. So that's now in the chat. And basically classifies the level of knowledge, as I mentioned, by these 4 categories. But what it does is, for each one of them, it gives you the depth of knowledge, the learning strategy, and the assessment strategy, right? We're thinking assessment. So what you might want to think about as you look through this, there's some existence knowledge, right? That says, does the learner know this knowledge or skill exists? Can the learner find the right search words? And the learning strategy associated with this existence level, the first row of the chart here, it may just be mentioned, demonstrated, or referenced in other learning, right? It's not the focus of your presentation. It's just something that you're entering for the first time, or something that the student or learner might already be aware of. They might already know the existence of. So this is usually not something you want to assess, and it's probably not going to be one of your 5 to 7 big topics that you focused on earlier, but it might be something that along the way will come up and could be easily referenced to, or someone could find on their own. Then there's the supported level. Can the learner recall the knowledge or perform the skills supported with help from notes, tutorials, and or peers? This could be included as a regular part of the learning experience, or in an out-of-class learning. You could have video tutorials, readings prepared, etc. And we like to assess that level with some low-stakes assessments. Think about homework assignments with multiple attempts. In math, we go through a lot of publisher type software, that homework assignment that could be done through that software. Think about group assignments at work, or even an open notes quiz. That will be your supported level of knowledge. One that the learner could recall easily, and they could do so just by having a little bit of aid, some notes, a tutorial, perhaps a classmate or a tutor, and that's supported knowledge. Then there is these other 2, independent and lifetime, and you could see on the slide here, those are the 2 that are sort of like the big topics in your class, right? They usually will feature the meat of those 5 or 7 big topics in great detail. So can the learner recall the knowledge or perform the skill independently without any assistance? That's independent. And maintain the skill until the next expected refresh. In math, we see that a lot because everything is scaffolded in our sequence to where you can't really take the next class until you've taken the previous one. So we revisit a lot of these topics again and again and again, and we get that expected refresh, but we want to make sure that the skills are maintained in between, right? So the learning experience for that one involves durable learning practices, right? Some more active interaction, repeated recall of knowledge, and relevance to other concepts of being learned. Now, this is where assessment strategies change a little bit because, like I said, it's the big topics in the course, right? You might want to have multiple formative assessments involved. You definitely want to make sure you have medium stakes assessments, right? Some problem sets, some open-ended essay type questions, etc. Maybe even one high stakes assessment on these topics, such as a big project, a paper, again, whatever works for your field and whatever is appropriate to test on. And of course, there is the lifetime level, and that's just knowledge that the student will, or skill that the student will get independently without assistance over time, with the goal of maintaining it for their lifetime. I like to call it the how to brush your teeth level of knowledge, right? Because you do that every day and you're an expert and you don't need any reference to anything. In addition to the independent learning strategies, it should be brought to recall repeatedly in integration with new material. So that's where you scaffold material in math, for example. Again, I teach math. And when you build new knowledge on the foundation of what you already have, being able to utilize sort of this independent learner skills that you've picked up. So in addition to the assessments on the independent level, the previous line, students' learning should be assessed in some kind of a cumulative event, a final exam or a term paper. So those are your main 5, really the main 5 topics of the course that you're looking at. So looking at this lens, I hope allows all of us to sort of rethink some of these assessments online and revisit some of what we're doing. So going back to the alignment, again, here's the 4 categories just with the first column, the basic question being asked. And here's an example from biology. Let's see what you all think. Give examples of clinically used drugs that target the microtubular system and potential side effects. Which level of learning would this be? Would it be existence, supported, independent, or lifetime? We could use the letters E, S, I, and L for each. And let's go ahead and enter your answer in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. Remember, you're going to wait for it to go. So you're just going to hit E, S, I, or L. And let's see how you approach this. I'm curious to see. First of all, I'm curious to see if we have biology teachers in the room. That would be interesting, right? We're trying to level the field here because not all of us might know biology. So I think you've had enough time, a few seconds have passed here. E, S, I, or L, 3, 2, 1, and go, everyone. Enter your answer. I see some I's. I see some 1 E. I see a couple of S's. I see 5 responses, 6 responses. I see another I. I see all 4. Very good. Now, notice I purposely left this very broad. I didn't really give you much direction or a way to tell which one it is. And again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. In an introductory to biology class, you might say, right? Let me go to the next slide here. You might say that it's an E or an S. You might say that it's something else if you're teaching pharmacy, right? So it all depends on the perspective you have and how far along in the curriculum this topic would come up, right? If you want your students to know about the microtubular system, then maybe this is an S or an I, and maybe it's a higher level, an I and L, if it's a pharmacy question that's key to the drug you're using, right? So I purposely kind of left it open-ended there, and I'm hoping that I didn't lose many of you, since I got fewer responses I might have, but that's okay. That was kind of the idea there. So now you try to think to yourself, okay, what variety of assessments could I use in order to achieve each one of these levels? And that's where your creativity and your use of technology kicks in, to where you might say, okay, a video lesson's helpful. Maybe I'll pull an oral exam. I'll create some projects or problem sets around the tubular system. I'll run some labs to show the effects of the given drug. Maybe I'll do a live simulation and record it. or I could just have a discussion with the students. Each one of those I've assigned a letter to here that I think is appropriate for that topic. And again, we might disagree. Again, if you're a biology teacher that knows this topic really well, you might feel that one of these assignments might be a different letter than what I've assigned. That's okay, right? Because we will have a different understanding of it. But that's where you're diving really deep and you're focusing in, you're having a conversation with your colleagues, and you're thinking, does each assessment match the level of depth to which I feel the students need to learn this topic? This is really the key question. When you're doing the assessments for your class, do they each match the level of depth on that chart that you saw earlier, and I put in the chat, that you want the students to learn the topic to? So always think about that when you're doing the assignments. Transparency is always important when you make assignments. Make sure your assessments are always transparent. Students are always aware what topics they need to focus on, how they'll be graded, and what the expectation is. I feel like in STEM, sometimes we, for whatever reason, we don't make that clear, and students feel like they're asked gotcha questions. I don't know how many times you've heard this type of feedback, but how many times have you heard, well, the question you asked on the test had nothing to do with what we did in lecture. I mean, it wasn't even close to it. I don't know. You never did a derivative like that in class. And perhaps we could avoid focusing on long processes and procedures and calculations and be more conceptual. But even if we know that a long computation is coming, nothing wrong with telling your students, hey, by the way, in this coming up exam, you really need to know how to compute all kinds of derivatives, because I'm going to ask you a computational question like that. Or you might say, hey, you really need to know the conceptual piece around the fundamental theorem of calculus, because I guarantee you that theorem is going to be on the test. By telling the students what to expect, yes, they're focusing in and studying those topics, but ultimately you're being transparent and you're being very equitable, and that's important. It's good for students to have the feeling that they're not going to be gotten during a test, but rather you're going to support their learning by asking those 5 or 7 big important topics in a variety of ways, right? Because again, you're trying to stress to them that those 5 or 7 topics are key. Through these combined efforts, we do lower some of the factors that lead to cheating. That's the list we started out with. That's still available on that website. I strongly encourage you to check it out. And I realize that I'm short on time here, so I'm glad that I'm just gonna jump to my thank you slide. But do feel free to post some questions in the chat. We do have 5 minutes, so I'm happy to answer some questions if they've come up. And I want to thank everyone so much for being here today. Like I said, I know it's the middle of summer, so there's many other things you could be doing on August 3rd than attending this conversation. So thank you all.
Eddie, we got quite a few requests for the slides. How would you like to make the slides available?
Let me see if I could just do a quick share out here in the chat, and it's loading. So in a few seconds, they should be available to download in the chat.
Great, thank you. And then the two other slides, the 2 other questions that have come up previously that I noticed in the chat, and again, feel free to add additional questions. One person asked for that sort of academic honesty or dishonesty statement that you shared at the beginning, where they do that at the end. Are there any consequences if the student doesn't sign, or how do you sort of force a student to do one way or the other? How do you do that?
You mean how do you make sure that they sign at the end?
Yes.
If you don't make it available at the very beginning, but it's at the very end of your exam, the statement itself and the prompt both are at the very end of the exam, then the student won't even get to it usually until they've gotten through the exam. Now, a lot of students do check out the entire exam before they start working on it. So naturally they will see it if it's printed towards the end, obviously, right? But
I think the question was, what happens if they don't sign it?
Oh, well, then you definitely need to have a conversation with that student, right? I think it's important to take that situation carefully and to have an honest face-to-face, maybe a Zoom one-on-one type situation, conversation with the student, and to just ask, so could you please help me understand why you didn't sign this statement, and what is it that took place, so that we could build from it and avoid having the situation in the future.
Gotcha. So the assumption is that they don't sign it, then maybe there's something wrong.
Right. I mean, usually what will happen as I'm seeing another question on that sort of trickle into the chat there, is what will end up happening is somehow that student will be dropping your class the next day.
Oh,
They might drop the class before you get to them, or if they don't include, they might come to you and they might say, "Oh yeah, I'd like to talk to you about that," and they might own up to it. My experience as a department chair, now putting that hat on, when it came to face-to-face cheating, about 95% of the cases, you only find out because someone else reports it. You really
right.
don't find out because, or someone owns up to it. You really don't find out because an instructor caught it. I mean, it happens, obviously, but majority of it is reported by other students.
And we got a question early on about the use of essay questions.
Okay.
That she was saying she likes to use essay questions, but she has noticed that it increases anxiety on performance and perhaps stereotype threat. And she's working on how to lower this before any exam. Any tips for that?
It hasn't been my experience. It hasn't been my experience at all in math. I do wonder if the person asking was teaching a science course or a math course. I know in math, part of the reasons why students actually prefer essay type questions is there's a lot of possibility for partial credit. So as an instructor, you're able to say, okay, I see your thinking process here, and I understand that you might have made a computational error or you went in a different direction from what the question was, but you're still showing solid evidence of knowledge here that I think I could account for and give you some partial credit. So I know that in math, a lot of folks like it for that reason because of the partial credit, and students are okay with it, but it hasn't been my experience. So really sorry to hear that. I wish I had more tips there, but I don't.
And then I don't know if you saw that question from Stephanie. Oh no, sorry. There was another question about above from Elizabeth. Ideas for computational type questions. Just a little. So she says ideas for those computational type questions, like computing all types of derivatives. She teaches calculus 1, 2, and she says students use a lot of photo math.
Yeah, there's a lot of apps out there. Nothing you could do to stop your students from doing them. That's why I would say it's a supported type level, of knowledge, how to compute it. It is important. There is no doubt it's important to know how to compute derivatives, but you might want to, that's where you might want to use publisher homework assignments or maybe do some group assignments where students are working together. You wouldn't want to make that a formative or medium stake assessment. Certainly, you want to focus on computation as a low stake assessment, right? Where you're just getting more practice and doing a bunch of them to get used to the actual topic at hand.
All right, we have just 1 minute left, so I don't know, did the slides ever come over? Do you guys
Yeah,
see the slides? Okay, I don't see them in my chat, but if maybe give a thumbs up or something if you see them in the chat. If not, you can also email ask@3CSN, and we can follow up with Eddie to get the slides. I also just put a link in the chat to our survey. We'd love to hear from you, how your experience was today, as well as our website, just 3csn.org. We have lots of other sessions that we encourage you to attend or share with colleagues. And again, if you did not get the slides or if they didn't load on your end, feel free to email us at ask@3csn.org. CSN, I'll put it in the chat again, ask@3csn.org. And we can follow up with you. We'll get those slides from Eddie and we'll follow up with you and provide you with those slides. So again, if you could do the survey, if you could just take a few seconds to quickly do that survey, we'd really appreciate it. We'd love to hear your feedback. It does help us plan. And we want to thank Eddie so much for what a really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. And we really hope to see you again at another 3CSN session.